Okay, good morning and welcome to this webinar on stamping out poor behaviour from workplace culture. So we're very much talking about cultural issues today, and it cannot have escaped your notice of how much there is in the news about poor culture, poor behaviour in workplaces, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But mostly today we are going to be talking about ways in which you can tackle it, which I hope will be helpful. As I've said to a couple of you already, there are no magic wands. If it was easy, we'd all have worked it out by now. But I hope I'm going to be able to share some things with you that will be useful. So, bit of housekeeping. If you want to ask me a question, you can pop it in chat. You could pop it to me directly, or you could put it in the general chat. You can also unmute yourself if you want and interrupt me if it's really important and I haven't spotted your question. At the end of the session, just about 10 o'clock, I will switch the recording off, and anyone who wants to stay and ask a question in a non-recorded and more private environment is very welcome to do so. So, and a reminder to any of you who've just joined, if you joined on a link that was forwarded to you by someone else, please send us your email via chat, or else we won't know you're here and we won't be able to send you the slides. So let us begin. For those of you who don't know us, and I know there are some friends and some new faces here today, this is typically the kind of people we work with. We do all things performance and management, of which cultural behaviour is a big part. We tend to work with organisations where people have been promoted because of their technical, professional or academic expertise, rather than because they're great people managers. So we tend to work with organisations with lots of bright, capable, able people, but maybe they don't have all the people skills that one might hope for, and they haven't been usually promoted on the basis of their people skills. So here's our agenda for today. That's a very brief introduction. I'll give you a little bit more introduction about me. We're going to think about behaviour as a cultural issue. We're going to think about power and autonomy and the demands of the job. And we're going to have a quick look at an interview with Lucy Dorsey of the British Transport Police, who I met and saw at the CIPD annual conference, annual festival this summer, and who I was deeply impressed with, and who laid down, I think, some very, very big challenges to the HR community. And we'll touch on some things that you might be able to do and take away as a result of all of this towards the end. So some practical stuff. For those of you who don't know me, I've run 3C for well over 15 years now, possibly nearly 20. I actually started as a mathematician. I went and worked in the theatre, and then I had a couple of decades in the global pulp and paper industry. So very much got an industrial background before I came into organisational development and performance management. So that's me. Let us move on. All right. This is quite a serious slide. You cannot, I'm sure, have missed that in the news in the last few weeks. We have had institutional misogyny discussed in a number of organisations, including the police force, particularly the Met. We have had Russell Brand and the stories that in plain sight, he was advocating a level of misogyny that, now that we look back at it, is unacceptable. And we've had the CEO of BP resign for a number of relationships with work colleagues that have not clearly been revealed. But what has been revealed is that it was an open secret, his relationships with colleagues, and it is inconceivable that the people who appointed him to his senior role didn't know. So I think this represents a huge challenge to us in HR, because all of these things that we're reading in the paper now were all clearly visible. And if you have in your organisation a situation where it's well known that you say, don't get in the lift with that person, you don't want to work in her team if you can avoid it, they're someone that you want to avoid having to go on business travel with. If you're advising people to avoid certain employees, if there are open secrets, whether it's about power relationships, whether it's about more senior people having relationships with junior people that they can enforce because they are powerful, whether you can see appalling behaviour happening in plain sight and undealt with and tolerated because of who they are. If you have those things, what we now know is that sooner or later you will have a catastrophe. The BBC is on yet another investigation into why they allowed such appalling behaviours to happen. A huge global organisation has lost its CEO overnight and consequently seen its share price fall, very direct financial impact on the bottom line. There will be more and more and more, undoubtedly, legislation coming in one way and legal recriminations coming in another. So it's easy for us to think that it's all about individuals and managers aren't having difficult conversations. But why would a manager have a difficult conversation if this is the culture that they're living in? So I know that I talk to lots of you in organisations that you say to me, oh, managers won't have the difficult conversations, they won't tackle people about their behaviour. But if this is the culture, why would they do that? Because they know there are going to be no rewards for tackling people. So as we go through today, I'd just like you to think for yourself what's really going on in your organisation. So in terms of how we manage performance, and very quick slide, I know lots of you have seen this before. We might think that values and behaviours are down here in this little left-hand corner that's all about the how we get things done. And we also think that it's somewhere over here in this little blue box, which is all about well-being and culture, and are we creating the right culture for people performing? But actually, we're really talking about the whole thing here. We're talking about how can we possibly deliver on our strategy when we have an environment where people, frankly, are not able to speak up and challenge poor behaviour? And how can we expect people on the other side to give us the best of their time, their talent and their energy if we put large numbers of them in positions where, frankly, they don't feel safe? So a lot of making the whole aspect of how we manage performance, how we engage, how we motivate, how we talk, how we give feedback is about psychological safety. And psychological safety depends on stamping out poor behaviour. So it isn't a small minor thing that has to be done on a corner. It's a big thing. All right, so let's just think about two things. Of course, people are responsible for their behaviour, right? Of course they are. So individually, people are responsible, and you cannot accept somebody going, well, everybody was in that bullying culture, so I bullied too, because I would rather bully than be bullied. People are individually responsible for their behaviour. And the rotten apple theory has some credence. Individuals can cause great damage, and sometimes removing individuals can make an enormous difference. And that does mean that poor performance conversations are vital. And I'm not decrying any of that. And I think we don't have enough tackling of individual behaviour. And some of the reasons for it are because we have allowed cultures to grow that tolerate poor behaviour. And therefore, at a cultural level, we tolerate it. And so managers don't deal with it at an individual level. And that's the real challenge. So when we look on the other side, we see that behaviour is cultural. And what we know, and I'm sure that you have seen it, is that we all adapt our behaviour to different environments. So in some environments, we can be, we might like to call it more authoritative or stronger or more powerful, but we also might like to call it more domineering, more demanding, more challenging. And we need constant feedback that shows us, is our behaviour driving in other people success, engagement, psychological safety, high performance, or is our behaviour actually reducing it? So the managers who think that the best way to manage is a variation of point and shout, it may be that they think that's getting the best out of people. But again, most of you will know that it isn't. But if there's a culture of management that is basically point and shout, it's going to be very, very hard to tackle them. So we need to think about both things. And that, so you're absolutely not letting individuals off the hook, but we need to tackle the culture. So here's a model that I think is quite interesting about how you might begin to tackle it. So on the left, I'm going to share with you what's called the job demand control model. And those of you who've done some more technical study of HR will probably have come across this. The model's about, I think, 10, 15 years old. So what the model says is that people's stress is a reaction to two things. It's a reaction to the demands placed on them by their jobs, and a reaction to the level of autonomy that they have in how they respond to the demands placed on them. Now, if demands are placed on you that are consistent and predictable and regular, so you know there's always going to be a rush at 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, or you know there's always pressure to deliver something on Friday morning, or we know that the last quarter of the year is when we're most likely to have to put in extra time, but it's all predictable, it tends not to cause as much stress as when you simply do not know whether you're going to have a quiet day or a busy day. You don't know where the next level of stress is coming from. You don't know what's going to happen next, and you aren't able to manage it and control it. So it's not that demand is really the thing that causes stress. It's the unpredictable and uncontrollable nature of demand causes high stress. And what we know is that as people are having to work in more and more in environments where demands become more and more unpredictable, managers managing in that environment can tend to lead towards a bullying culture, or a just get it done, a shouting, a pressure culture, as they are under enormous pressure to deliver in an unpredictable environment. And that pressure then plays out on the people below them. So we see that as we have increasing job demand, we get increasing levels of bullying and other poor behaviours. And I'm using bullying here as a shortcut for a range of poor behaviours. Similarly, as managers have more and more control, that is power over people, the people who work for them have less and less autonomy. And also we see that those people are more likely to experience bullying and harassment in their teams, maybe from their manager or maybe from other people. So we know that more job demands increases bullying, more unpredictable job demands increases bullying, and we know that increased managerial control increases bullying. But if we get both of those things, we start to get an exponential rise in people reporting poor behaviours. So from here you can see, and obviously I've just drawn it in a very simple way, but we can see here that this kind of shows us that as we increase both managerial control, i.e. we reduce autonomy, and we increase the unpredictable nature of job demands, then we see increases in bullying and harassment. Now, one of the places that we all know that has happened a great deal is in the NHS, because the effect of COVID was to massively increase the unpredictability of demands on everybody. And the increasing pressure on the NHS to respond to a whole load of unpredictable things increased pressure on everybody. At the same time, more and more and more demands are put on them from a managerial level, right from the very senior political level. And that creates a very, very, very strong bullying culture, or the potential for a strong bullying culture. And we see that in a lot of engagement surveys in the NHS, and we see it in high numbers of people deciding that they can't take it anymore and they're not prepared to take it anymore. So very challenging behaviours. I think I've put a little workplace up. I have put a little reference there if any of you want to go and look at the article that was most about this. It was in the European Journal of Work and Organisational Psychology. So if any of you would like to go and read some of the detail behind that, please do. But this is the underlying thing. So what can you do about that? I think, and we'll give a few examples at the end, but your immediate takeaway is going to be looking at which areas, sections, employees, teams, work projects are most unpredictable. So where have you got groups of people working in very unpredictable environments where they really can't control what comes through the door, and it can be extremely stressful for them dealing with it? So you can look there and then look at the structures that you've got in place there and see how much autonomy is delegated to people and what might need to happen in order to give them more autonomy. And indeed, are there ways in which, for example, through triaging, in some sense, it's possible to reduce the unpredictability of the impact on the employees, even if you can't reduce the unpredictability of the work that comes through the door. So 2 structural things there that you can really take away and think about and look at in your organisation. Now let us turn to some cultural things. And this is a quote from Lucy Dorsey, who is the Chief Constable of British Transport Police, and she's the first female Chief Constable of British Transport Police. And she gave a presentation, well, not presentation, she did an interview, really. It was a much more informal session at the Festival of Work, the CIPD ran this morning, and she ran in June. And it has been written up in HR magazine, so you can read, it's almost verbatim quoted in HR magazine. But I was there, and she talked about predatory behaviour, and she said one of the things that she found really difficult was that she had managed teams that included both Wayne Couzens and David Evans, who had been subsequently been convicted, Wayne for the murder of Sarah Everard and David for multiple sexual attacks on women. And she said, what is it that I didn't see in all of that time? What is it? Oh, I'm sorry. What was going on? And she said, I have to look at myself in the mirror every day and challenge myself as to why I wasn't able to see what was happening. So she has set out to create a hostile environment for predators. And I found it an amazing thing for her to say that. What an extraordinary thing. And I challenged her in the conference. I said, people in HR would never use the word, we want a hostile environment. When would we ever say that? We're always talking about trying to create support and care. And she was very blunt, and she said, we're not going to drive out appalling behaviour through support and care. We have to make it so it is culturally unacceptable. So here are some things that she said. And she talked about a couple of things that were very interesting that I think are worth sharing. So she said, we've got a 0 tolerance approach to inappropriate behaviour. Now, I think lots of your organisations might say they have a 0 tolerance approach, but the question is, do they actually have one? And one of the things that she uses in the 0 tolerance is she doesn't just deal with it, but she names it. So on the right-hand side, you can see that she said she stopped being soft in language about malpractice. So she stopped saying, oh, they said some things that were inappropriate. Now they will say, these are the words that were used. These are the actions that were done. And she will absolutely name them. She does not want to give people anything to hide behind. And we're very wary about that, aren't we? You know, there's this kind of thing about we don't want to name and shame. That doesn't feel like a good thing to do. But actually, her point is that if we don't name the behaviours that we don't want, we are creating an environment where those behaviours are still seen not recognised as being unacceptable. And she's prepared to publish press releases that say so-and-so has been removed, this is what he said, he did, she did, they did, whatever. And similarly, she did something else. So she particularly talked about listening in respect to the EDI. She's a white woman, but she talked about an activity she went through after George Floyd's death in America. And she listened to minority groups. And what she recognised was that she both felt very angry on behalf of those people, but she didn't have those experiences. And she began to reflect on why those people didn't speak up, why they were quieter. And she realized in the end that it was her job to speak up for those people. So, and I know we always hear about, why don't people report it? Why don't they say? Why don't they come forward? And the truth is, we know why they don't come forward when people experience poor behavior. It's because they are more likely to be on the receiving end of more poor behavior, to be blamed in some way, to be told they've got an eggshell personality, that they are trying to curry favor rather than actually dealing with something that's problematic. So your leaders perhaps need to think about how they personally amplify the voices of those who may experience difficult things. In other words, it's not that your leader says, well, I've set up a hotline for them to phone, because yes, they can phone the hotline, but that is not the leader amplifying the voice of the people who have experienced poor behaviors. So again, something that you might want to think about from a constructive point of view is, if you want to make your organization a place where poor behavior is simply unacceptable, you need your leaders to be talking about it, not just saying they've created a space where other people can talk about it. They need to step forward. Okay. So in terms of the behaviors, one of the things that Lucy Dorsey said was, people need to know that if they behave in a poor way, they're going to get reported. So we need to create an environment where they can get reported and where action is taken on the reporting. And one of the things that she then spoke about was that because they have taken action, and they have done to some degree naming and shaming, but certainly very clear descriptions of what poor behavior is, they have seen a real increase in reporting of poor behavior and real challenges to people who have been behaving in a way that's not culturally acceptable. And she talked again about, we don't want people in our organization who think that it's okay to behave in this way. We simply don't want them. It's not about we're trying to change them. Of course, if somebody says they want to learn and adapt and is up for engaging with us, they will get support. But if someone chooses to consistently behave in a way that we don't like, then we don't want them. And it's as simple as that. So I think that power is really important. Oh, this is coming at the end. This is a quick note, just to those of you who have a think about it. On Monday, this coming Monday, if any of you want to have one-to-ones with me on any of these issues, I will be available for half-hour open dialogues with people. So just, I'll put this up again at the end, but I'm very aware that for some of you, this is quite difficult to talk about. So what do? Here we go. A couple of things for you to do. So look at the work and the job design in your organization. Where are people under the most job stress and where is autonomy lowest? Just do a straightforward, simple analysis. And you might already have that information in places like your employee engagement surveys. Even in kind of normal performance management data, you may well see where are the most demanding jobs. It may well already be known. And then you need to give people insights, especially managers and leaders, but that there are links between living in very high demand job areas, working in very high demand job areas, and bullying, and to help people to see that this is a risk in that environment, and therefore it's something to look out for. Similarly, where there's very low autonomy, help people understand that low autonomy can lead to bullying, and therefore design more autonomy in wherever they can, and then give them tools to lead conversations about what is the difference between managerial control and bullying. Because of course managers have to manage, we need people to do jobs, but give them some tools to explore the difference between those two things and to enable them to have discussions as manager groups and more widely across the organization. And then also set up a wider understanding about areas where you're already getting the most grievances and the most complaints, and look at specific actions. Have we got individuals there, or have we got structural problems that will lead to bullying, or have we got weak leadership that is not dealing with the culture rather than the individual? So things to do there. And then from your cultural perspective, I think look at the language that's being used around it. You know, are we talking to some people that all poor behavior is about individuals? If it's always about, oh, it's that individual, that's a red flag to me. If you've got a lot of poor behavior problems and you're just saying we've got a lot of problem individuals, I don't think you've got a lot of problem individuals there. You've got some cultural problems that are getting endemic. Do you have areas where teams are seen as problems? All right. Oh, that's a real problem team. Doesn't matter what we do. It never works well. It never functions properly. Is that something about the structure of the work in that team? Is that something about the way that team is managed, the level of autonomy, even the level of autonomy for the leaders of that team that create problems? So help look at language, look at things where we're saying words that should be red flags to us. For example, are some characters tricky? What does that mean? How are we exploring what tricky means? Is somebody hiding in plain sight? Do we need to deal with it? And again, start conversations around what is the behavioural culture, not telling them to live the values, but actually what really is the culture. Give managers some tools, and we've got some tools you might like to look at where they can explore whether or not they've really got a problem person or a problem culture, and create an expectation that cultural behaviour standards are non-negotiable. And that is something that has to come from the top. And it might, if you have a leadership team that tolerate poor behaviour, you've probably got to take them on quite a journey to see the connections between poor behaviour, their leadership, poor performance, grievance discipline, and ultimately an underperforming organisation. All right, that is a whistle-stop tour of what we've talked about. Here's my summary. Behaviour flourishes in areas where there's high unpredictable job demands and low autonomy. It can become cultural very quickly if you don't deal with it. And the more publicly you deal with it, the better. We've tended to have a culture of saying, we'll deal with it privately. Actually, you probably need to deal with it publicly. Organisations avoid it by talking about, well, it's just a few rotten apples and we'll get rid of those. That's not the case. Using the phrase a hostile environment for poor behaviour sounds really shocking, and it shocked me. But it could well be that that's what's needed. And we only have to look at many of the things that happened that we've heard in the news in the last few weeks to realise that many cultures that would say they wouldn't tolerate poor behaviour actually allowed it to happen all the time without any problem.